Welcome, Chargeback Army, to Chargeback Forward. As always, I'm Mike.
And I'm Terence.
And today we'll be talking about, well, here's the odd thing. We'd love to talk about the video game for this movie, but so on our brother channel,
Video Game Soundtrack Review,
we just talked in length about the Akira soundtrack. So we thought we always have a video to go with the soundtrack. We talked about Golden Axe, so on and so forth. But for Akira, there really wasn't anything. You know, there was a visual novel released on the Famicom that was never officially translated. There was a canceled game on the Super Nintendo that was going to be released by THQ, and THQ back in the 90s was, they were pretty bad, so it's probably a good thing it got canceled. And then I believe there was an Akira pinball game that came out on the PS2 in like 2001, 2002 or something like that. So basically...
you were saying there's an Akira game?
There is one.
An Amiga game.
I believe there's one. I could be wrong on this, folks, but being North American, our knowledge of the Amiga is a bit limited. So I believe there was an Amiga game which notoriously got released broken, essentially, where you couldn't get past the first level. And I think even when they sent out review copies to all the magazines, they sent them cheat codes to get to the other levels, to at least see what the other levels look like. It's a mess. So essentially, there is nothing...
There's nothing to speak of.
There's really nothing to speak of. So we were tossing around a couple of ideas of what we could talk about, because Akira is such a phenomenal film that we can just not talk about it. And, you know, we're also going over, like, oh, what did it influence? And we thought, you know what? It influenced a lot, and we probably covered most of it during our Snatcher talk anyway, because the two live side by side, you know, quite often.
Mm-hmm. Same year of release initially, 88. Yeah, basically we talked forever about the soundtrack. I was actually surprised. the things that come to mind, because we had just listened to the soundtrack, and you can check that video out on our brother channel, Video Game Soundtrack Review. I'm looking forward to editing it, to be honest with you. Like, I'm interested because it was our longest video game soundtrack review video, and probably save stuff that we did with Shane on The Hook on Re-Res. It's probably one of our longest videos. So I'm really looking forward to just reliving that by watching it and editing. But we wanted to do a video, obviously, for the Chargeback Army. And since we're not going to talk about a video game, because quite frankly, the Akira video game that we always wanted was never delivered to us.
Yep.
Hell, when you look at movies up until this point, Chronicle is a movie that I believe came the closest to capturing the essence of like a younger individual that's going through some emotional disturbances, and obviously how their new power is affecting them, and the path of destruction. Have you seen Chronicle?
I never have.
Oh, dude, man, you'll literally think of Akira when you're watching it. And I think season 2 of Stranger Things had a direct homage to a hospital scene in Akira. So, but let's talk about the movie, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of the influence it had and where it really stands in motion picture history. I guess,
because I think it's one of those films that, okay, animation as North Americans, and maybe even Europeans as well, but especially North Americans, I speak from experience, we were used to Disney. Not so much, Fox, Warner Brothers, stuff like that, which was maybe geared towards kids.
Younger audience.
Yeah, it had some adult stuff thrown in there, but it was mostly kids.
Rocky and Bullwinkle.
And there was some, like, you know, back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was some Ralph Bakshi stuff, like Fritz the Cat and Hey Good Looking and stuff like that, which was very adult, but that was few and far between.
Yeah, for every heavy metal, there was like 1,000 Smurfs.
Exactly. So when this came along, it kind of caught us off guard, I would say. Like, from my experiences, I was in high school at the time. A friend of mine had rented it because one of the video stores where I lived was actually bringing in some odd import stuff and anime, and he loved it so much. He says, "You've got to watch this before I return it." And I remember watching it and then instantly re-renting it and just watching it, because it was like a animated movie that wasn't made to be animated in a weird sense. Like, it was. And maybe this is especially back then, a very Japanese thing, where Japan had this ability to make, you know, their cutesy kid stuff or whatever, but they could also do animations that, it was just animated for, maybe convenience or the fact that it was easier to animate certain things other than the special effects budget would have taken to do certain things. So it didn't feel like it had to be animated. It just worked really that well. And I think the way the director looked at it too was just like, this is serious. This is a serious film. Absolutely, it's to be taken serious. Yeah. It's very deep. It's very emotional. There's a lot to it. Use the cliche. It takes multiple viewings, and it's. I think at the time, we had, especially North America, had really gone like, "Ooh, what's this like?" There's no talking animals. There's no, you know what I mean. There's no. They don't break into musical numbers every 5 minutes.
There's no humanoid cat prostitutes.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with a movie that's not rated R. Exclusively because of like adult situations. Akira is an incredibly violent film, an incredibly violent film. But it's for the most part, if not always, it's well-placed violence. It is in service of the story, and even though it is, there are some moments, especially earlier on, the issue of number. Oh God, what's the first kid you see? Number 20.
There's, I can't remember the number, but it's when he's being dragged.
He's being dragged.
He's being chased by the dogs.
Yeah, being chased by the dogs.
Yeah.
And it's in Neo Tokyo at night, and there's mass like protests happening a street over, and so that didn't end well. But and again, different culture in Japan. They whether it was anime or whatever, it was manga, so they're comics. It wasn't just for superhero or science fiction. There was a lot of drama. The audience was much more diverse. So you may have a 13-year-old girl reading like some romantic comedy or whatever would appeal to that age group. So definitely the art of drawing went a lot further in Japan than it did in North America.
It's very common to see people like on the subway, like young and old alike, reading a manga because they had so many different stories that could suit every different age group or lifestyle or whatever they had. So it wasn't just, like I said, it wasn't just Archie Comics over there. But you're right about the violence. It is horrifically violent at times, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's violent for the sake of being violent. Like Heavy Metal is a perfect example of a film. And believe me, I love Heavy Metal. It's a great film, but some of the violence in there is just for shock value. Whereas in Akira, it's almost like you feel dirty and awful from like the scene. I don't want to spoil it for you, haven't seen it, but at
this point, guys, like really, you should see the movie. And if you haven't at this point, this is your official endorsement.
Yeah,
from Chargeback Forward to watch this movie.
So there's a scene very early in the film where it's a brutally violent shootout scene, but it's not. You don't. If you're watching maybe a John Woo movie or something like that, and you're kind of get excited about the action sequences, this one you kind of go, ugh. Like this one here.
I found the violence, whether it was inflicted by a gun or whether it was inflicted by a vehicle or by psychic powers, that's a little spoiler, but you know what? 88 available in North America, in the West since 91, so fair one. You had time. I felt the violence in Akira, even though it was animated, was more realistic. And now here's the thing with violence that you see in video games and violence that you see in movies. It is a cartoon interpretation of it. It is glorified, and it does not go the way that it does in reality. And I found it very interesting that the animators took the time to capture these acts in a very raw and unflattering way. Now, in and of themselves, because of just everything in this movie looks beautiful, how it's animated, but there is an instance in the first big action piece of the action set piece of the movie where one of the rival gang members falls off of his motorcycle and is subsequently run over. I think he's run over maybe towards a shoulder, and you see that impact and how that looks, and then you just kind of see him go into the distance as the action is keeping with the motorcycle, or the other one where there's a guy riding a motorcycle, and then I don't know, he sees something and he's distracted.
He's distracted, yeah.
And then when he looks back, he realizes that he's gonna hit an obstruction. He's gonna hit some kind of concrete you know, the words that are coming to my mind are too 2018 for it, so I'm going to refrain from that. But basically a concrete barrier, and just how he was catapulted from the motorcycle and how it kind of flew through the air and the impact in slow motion. And it's literally the entire frame is this dude's body as he's going through the rolling. And okay, I rode a motorcycle for many years, so let me tell you, that type of thing is pretty scary, the concept of that. And to see it depicted in such a way where there's such gravity, there's such a tangible quality to how they animated. Like for a traditional 2D animated film in a sequence like this, it had a real ability, like a real aesthetic to it that I hadn't seen in animation until years later. And to be quite honest with you, Mike, I still believe overall that this is the best animated, like best looking animated movie ever.
It's so fluid, the animation. It's right, especially with the guy when he's of course like rolling around. Like it doesn't look like, you know, when you watch current animation or any, there seems to be like not really frames missing, but just the animation is not super smooth. It's not natural moving, for example. But Akira, if you didn't know it was animated, if you're maybe even seeing it from the distance, you'd almost think it was like live action. The way the characters are moving, like there's scenes where the characters are together, like when they're in the holding cell and talking, and just the subtle movements, the facial animations, the nudging, the human-like behavior
elements of
is so well, and it's crazy to think. And now, especially a lot of our younger viewers may be used to animation that's heavily used, you know, by computers and CG. And this movie, though, with the exception of a couple of special effects, is still technically all hand drawn. And this is like, you know, like flipping the page hand drawn.
And to really bring that in, and I honestly, I would assume that what I'm going to talk about now would have to have some computer assistance in this. But the amount of detail, and I'm just going to say one word, and I want you to look at the camera as I say this word, and I want the Chargeback Army to read your, I'm going to say one word, you're going to read your expression. Tank.
Yes.
So there's a scene where a tank comes around the corner. And I have never seen something animated so well. From its presence in the scene, its physical presence, you could tell that this thing had size and weight, and then all the things that are happening, like the things rattling, you know, rattling around.
Even though like a little bit of camera shake as it's coming over, because you know if you've ever been to an area where there's a, like, you know, like in a parade or something like that, where they bring a tank or something like that, like those are heavy, bloody vehicles. Even moving at a slow speed, like the ground is shaking as those things go by.
So it is a beautiful movie, you know, and I do think, and you know, people would say, you know, Terence, you're crazy. There's better looking animated movies that have come. This movie's 30 years old, right? Wow, 30 years old. And yeah, I'm going to agree. For example, one of the best sequels ever made is Evangelion 2, You Cannot Advance, or... I like doing this, guys. I like literally going out of frame now. Yeah, I'm right. Great. So, Neon Genesis Evangelion was a TV show that ran for one series in Japan in 1996. Hugely popular, to the point that it is still a cultural phenomenon in Japan and many other parts of the world. At a certain point, they decided that, hey, you know, let's make theatrical remakes of Neon Genesis Evangelion, and that's where Evangelion 1.0 came from, 2.0, and 3.0, and then eventually we're getting 3+1 or whatever they're calling it. And they're home releases because if you saw Evangelion, which none of us did in the theater, the home version refined the animation that much more. So Evangelion 1 became Evangelion, like, you know, like 1.1, Evangelion 2 is 2.22, etc. And even though Evangelion 2 is one of the best sequels made ever, animated or otherwise, as beautiful as that looks, the reliance on computer technology takes away from it, because we know how much effort was put into this, how many animators, how many man hours that were put into the meticulous animation to make this as believable as possible. Now it was, you know, it's still stylized. You know, obviously this is a representation of a human. You know, there's no worries about kind of going over the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
But just how they occurred in their space, the weight and presence.
And they didn't, as far as I know, like some of the earlier animation in North America that looked super realistic, they used rotoscoping, which was just like Disney used it, and the Ralph Bakshi used it a lot, where they just basically film actors, then trace over it. as far as my understanding is, there's no rotoscoping in this
No.
at all. It's all like physically hand drawn. They didn't trace over live actors at all.
Which really blows me away if you think of the guy that falls off the motorcycle
Yeah.
and goes through that rolling. So the movie, of course, as itself is phenomenal. It is a mix of genres. You know, it is a very philosophical movie as well, and that's something that obviously you and I wouldn't have totally caught when we first watched it, or even the first several times, because the first several times you and I watched it would have been the streamlined dub. Now, the streamlined dub, be it hugely entertaining with some good talent and some fantastic lines. I think I sputtered a couple others in the video game soundtrack review video that we're talking about it.
It's not accurate to the script, is what happened. Like basically, this company that dubbed the movie, they were one of the few companies that were actually dubbing anime at the time. They're Canadian. They're out of Vancouver, I believe. So they were one of the. So it's either them or no one. Is pretty much what happened. So when they translated it, now Akira is a complicated film. So, but unfortunately, when they originally dubbed it, they didn't really work off. They didn't translate it word for word from the script. They changed a few things around. And when you have a movie that's this complicated, and you change even just a few things, you miss a lot. So, so if you had seen the original VHS or Laserdisc edition that had that dub, we always make the joke as like, you got to watch it multiple times. Well, you still should watch it multiple times, but at the time we had to watch it multiple times because it was kind of confusing.
And nothing like that had been released before.
Yeah.
And so back in 1988, you know, the best examples that we can compare it to in terms of animation that was more, I'm really stretching it here, but more adult focused. And I'm stretching it there. I'm going to include Transformers the movie, G.I. Joe the movie, Heavy Metal, Fritz the Cat, the Lord of the Rings movie. You know, there was select animated features that were geared towards an older audience. But with this was so much so that it had never seen before. I'd never seen a movie with such adult themes. And then once the DVD version was released, the Pioneer DVD version, which had their own English dub, which I don't know. I guess there would be people that would be like partial to it. I don't remember it at all. All I know is there was no what that pea brain.
Yeah,
none of that.
It was a bit jarring at first because we had watched the original dubs so many bloody times. We're so used to those voices, and so it was a bit jarring listening to this, like all these new voices all of a sudden for a movie that I had already seen probably 20 plus times beforehand. But they did basically do the dub off their script, so a lot of the things that were a bit confusing were no longer confusing because now they were properly explained.
Yes, and so what we also had for the first time available to us, and you're gonna just slap this fact out of my face. I know how you're gonna do it, but this was the first time, anyways, that I had exposure to the original Japanese audio with subtitles, and that's when I started to really understand the movie. And when it came out on DVD initially in the steel tin, is around the time that Dark Horse released the omnibus collections of the entirety of the Akira comic book, which ran for 10 years, and basically the end of this movie is more or less halfway through the story. But they tied it up in a way that it can kind of like, for movie's sake, it's over. And you know, and then of course, by the time it came around to Blu-ray, that's where we got the true essence of the sound of it. It was recorded at the highest possible, I don't even know what to refer to it as, the least level of compression. The highest level of fidelity that would play on a Blu-ray player that would be compatible, and it was absolutely breathtaking. Mike, so you've seen it on VHS, you've seen it on DVD, you've seen it on Laserdisc, you've seen it on Blu-ray. Seen it in theater?
No.
Okay.
No, I know it got some special re-releases here and there, but I never got to see it in the theater.
So in every version that you've seen, which is your favorite presentation and why?
Ooh. I got to be a bit of a snob, and because I'm as much as I still enjoy old video, because the VHS obviously is very nostalgic. The Laserdisc is produced by Criterion, and now like literally hangs on my wall of my theater. Is all very sentimental, but in terms of overall, and especially the dub, even though the dub is bad in terms of translation, it's still enjoyable. But overall, I still have to go with the Blu-ray release because the quality of the sound, the sharpness of the picture, you know, though I do like the kind of analog look of Laserdisc. I still really like that. But I have to admit, how good the animation looks on Akira, like that, seeing it at in 1080p at the time, it was almost like watching it for the first time again. Very nice.
I do agree with everything you said. I have a difference of opinion. Of course, this is very personal, as I'm like eagerly looking over at that document. My favorite became my favorite version of far later, and it had almost nothing to do with it. So for me, it's the Laserdisc. And the reason why I love the Laserdisc version is because it looks better than the VHS. So of my earliest memories, is a dubbed VHS, and then I had my own original copy. But there's something about movies on Laserdisc. Okay, it's not going to have the visual fidelity that you would expect from Blu-ray.
Yeah,
that's fine. Not even really the same fidelity that you would get from a DVD. But what it did have is texturally, it was perfect.
Yeah,
and because even though the detail was there, sometimes it's better not to see the detail or have the detail implied. Right. So years back, Mike and I did a short film called Connect Report, and it was a project that took a little while to get together, and it was something that I enjoyed sharing with people after the fact. And my favorite viewing of Connect Report, oh yeah, by the way, link. My favorite viewing of Connect Report was actually at my friend Bilal's place. He had his computer hooked up to a CRT TV. So we literally watched Connect Report from the YouTube source on like a CRT, and not like a progressive scan, not like a newer fancy one. It was just a CRT TV. And Mike, it looked better than any time I've ever seen it, because everything came together. And that's what I really feel about Laserdisc, is it gives you enough of what you need. There's people that'll say things like, oh, you can't see in 4K, and I don't want to really get into that one way or another. Or oh, you can't tell the difference between digital and analog, or all this garbage in terms of music. But when it came to watching something on Laserdisc, and then oddly, because of the approximation of the CRT, seeing Connect Report look like kind of how it would have looked on Laserdisc, it made me feel that I was watching something that was otherworldly. Like it created such a unique texture to it that I felt compelled to watch it, to soak up everything that I could see and imagine everything that I couldn't see. And that's something that we don't get anymore.
It's true.
Now it's Blu-ray's old news. Now it's 4K.
I just want to mention,
see the pores.
My Laserdisc is still hooked up to my TV.
It is, and that's and it's actually.
And I still have a pretty good stack of Laserdiscs.
Yeah, and the viewing in which I speak of watching Akira on Laserdisc, and I know we didn't watch the whole thing, so it's really funny that I still say it. But from what you showed me at your place, like it won me over. It was better than any version that I saw, and it was just because it was. I'd seen it everywhere from here to here, but right in there was the sweet spots. So I don't know. It's just, that's my personal opinion.
No, listen, the Laserdisc edition, like I remember when I bought that. Now Laserdiscs back at the time were extremely expensive. They were just, oh man, they were easily $100 a movie, and I remember paying like hundreds of dollars for like maybe like a Star Wars set or something like that, like when there's multiple movies. And I believe the Criterion version of Akira. This is Canadian dollars, and this would have been now very early 90s, because I got a Laserdisc player, kind of like after 91. Maybe I think it was like maybe 93, 94 if I bought a Laserdisc player. I think it cost me about $150, and that was 1995 money, or whatever it was.
That's brutal.
But yeah, it's quite nice, like especially with Criterion with their releases. Like obviously it has the highest quality a Laserdisc could have. It had multiple gatefolds, artwork, everything. Like they really did a giant presentation, and that's this is maybe a discussion for another day, but there's something very much missing from streaming movies and whatnot. Like just and we talk about it with vinyl, how it's just bloody cool having this thing, having to take care of it and flipping. And Laserdisc is very similar. It's the same size as an LP. But it's heavy, and it's a big giant optical disc that even though the sound is digital, the video is audio. The audio is analog still. And you open this giant player with this giant tray that comes out. It sounds like a freaking tank, and you pop in this thing. There's something about it that's still so damn cool.
I remember being at my friend Andrew's place back in high school, and a bunch of us always got together, and we'd rent Laserdiscs from Jumbo Video down the street. And I remember, because, you know, that was our first in-home experience of digital audio, you know,
Mhm.
Dolby Digital, Dolby AC3. And I remember my buddy had he had a big CRT TV and he had a surround setup happening. So, do you remember, Mike, one of the first Dolby Digital kind of, bumpers, kind of like how the THX had their one. So Dolby Digital had a couple. They had a train, like a locomotive one, right?
Remember the helicopter flying through the city?
The helicopter flying through the city. Now this particular one, I think this may be connected to the helicopter one. I don't know, but it's the one that has the theater, and then each letter.
Yes. Yeah, that is the helicopter. That's at the end of the sequence. Yeah.
All right. So in this sequence, each time a letter lights up, DOLBY. Yep. It would make a sound like boom, 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 boom. And on that last boom, we heard a boom that we had never heard before because we'd seen this intro sequence a couple of times. And that boom was a thunderous crash. And we looked behind us, and the left rear channel actually fell off the stand. His speaker falls off the stand and is on the ground. So yeah, you're right. When it comes to this is a great conversation we probably should have in another video. Look forward to this one, guys. The next time we talk about a soundtrack that we can't really string together a video game, a video for Chargeback Forward, but not unlike LPs, Laserdiscs, since they had that size, they were able. You couldn't do art on a CD size, cover like that. It's like not even a quarter of the size of this. Mm-hmm. So definitely more collector, obviously $150. It's like highway robbery.
Yeah, it was very, I hate to use the term, it was a status symbol, but having a Laserdisc player back then, because this was before DVD, and I bought Laserdisc player super late, like they've been out since the late 70s. Mm-hmm. They really started getting good in the late 80s, early 90s when they started incorporating like digital sound. Like this sound was analog for its first few years, and then it switched to digital sound. But yeah, it was one of those things. It was kind of like the video games owning a 3DO back then. It was like, have this, and yeah, I used to make fun of it. We would walk into HMV downtown Toronto, and I used to make fun of the people like, "Oh, you looking in the VHS section, are you?" Well, I'm going to go over to the Laserdisc section, and you can buy 5 movies for the price of buying one. But that's okay.
That's okay because the friends are coming over to my place, not your place, which is what happened with my friend Andrew. Is we would, I think he started the tradition of Saturday night movies at someone's house because it was cool to see. Well, there you go. We've talked about this great movie Akira, and
multiple formats to watch.
Multiple formats. The influences are literally everywhere. Pretty much everything you've seen since 1988 has been anything action-oriented, anything with a cityscape, anything, pretty much anything animated coming out of Japan. It's a huge, and still, I'm being very generalization of this, but I do believe that the impact that Akira has had on pop culture since its initial release is nearly without comparison.
So here's a challenge/fun activity I'm going to put out to the Chargeback Army for this. So if you haven't seen Akira, watch it. If you haven't seen it in a long time, watch it again. And then now think about all these tiny little, and any show you've watched that have been influenced by Akira. And I'll get you one to get started. Batman the Animated Series, which was in the early 90s, so a few years after Akira. There's a scene where Robin's on the motorcycle and he skids down the street, and the way the camera pans up is a direct copy of the bike scene in Akira when Kaneda skids across. It's like perfectly done.
And it's not the only one done in Batman the Animated Series. Yeah. So in Batman Mask of the Phantasm, which was a theatrical release for Batman the Animated Series, which was fantastic in the theater. There's Bruce Wayne. I don't even think he's in his Batman regale. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. I haven't watched the movie in 1,000 years. But anyways, he's running towards running towards a motorcycle, and then immediately, wow, they're going to do the Akira thing. So in Akira, Kaneda does this move where he runs towards one of the motorcycle clown gang members, and he jumps up. He plants his foot on the front, the front fender of the motorcycle's wheel. And then he launches off that, and he kicks the guy in the face, right? So in the Batman Mask of the Phantasm, it was the exact same thing, but instead it was a side view, and it was like this really beefy punch. So from an art standpoint, it's kind of funny because of when Snatcher was originally released. It's kind of hard to say that Snatcher ripped off Akira. But I can't help but look at the cityscape at the beginning of Snatcher, especially in its later versions, and not think
the spotlights
and literally not think of this right here.
So if you I'm sure that here's again for our little our adventure here. I'm sure you've seen multiple animated movies where that technique is used, where they show the cityscape and they show these random spotlights just moving back and forth. And if you're ever wondering, like, why did they think of that idea? They didn't.
This, the lasers, the like a separation between like foreground buildings, and they just like I'm thinking Judge Dredd. I'm thinking Dredd right now, Dredd 3D, Peachtree 1 or whatever they call the building. I know Peachtree's like a TV station, but whatever they call it, these mega complexes behind them. It's a phenomenal movie. It's a movie that if you have any interest in craftsmanship, if you have any interest in animation. If you're lucky enough to have a sound system that can support the openness of the soundtrack that is Akira, on the Blu-ray, it's definitely something that you have to experience it. And I know now it's a lot different because a lot has happened in 30 years in terms of how much media we're exposed to. And once upon a time, you can kind of have a chat at a water cooler, and you and I would, even if we weren't friends, and even if we weren't really, had the same interest, there would always be kind of, hey, did you see this, or did you hear about this, and what happened? What's happened with just the availability of content now has exploded to a point that's made, for me, anime redundant and useless.
Yeah, it's
too much of it.
It's oversaturation.
It's way oversaturation.
Like back then, like there wasn't the explosion yet. Like there was. Like we had seen stuff in the 80s, maybe not even, we discussed before, maybe not even at the time knowing it was, at the time we used to call it Japanimation. So like, Robotech and even Transformers, even though that was written by Americans, it was all animated in Japan. And Battle of the Planets. So stuff like that we had seen, but this was...
Astro Boy, Speed Racer.
Speed Racer, a perfect example. There's one that predates all those. So this was before the boom. Like this was even before like Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball became popular in North America. Like this is even before that.
All of that became popular because of Akira.
Yeah.
Now, if the older cartoons, of the examples, Astro Boy, and I want to call him Wonder Boy. We're in a video game show, so Astro Boy and Speed Racer, and then ones that are obviously not coming to my mind. If that was the spark that lit what is anime now in terms of its very broad acceptance globally, if that was the spark. This was the actual point where it engulfed into flames, and because everything in anime came because after Akira was in one way or another influenced by Akira. You could not get around it. It was such a phenomenon. It was so big and groundbreaking. Like it's hard talking about a movie that came out in 1988 and 2018 and be like, guys, you gotta watch this. But all you have to do is you just have to put yourself. It is 1988. And all you have to do is take 3 minutes to see what were the movies, what were the animated movies, what were the top hits on the charts for music. And you can really see that this just went in a completely different direction. And it was nothing we'd ever... Literally, even though we had been exposed to animation from Japan, this level of detail, this level of commitment, this level of perfection was never even close. It was so good you didn't even know how to contextualize it. And all the great things that come from anime now, if you've seen this movie and you understand it in a historical context, this is the foundation blocks to what you watch and enjoy now. And of course, at this point, this influenced certain, shows, like the anime shows on TV and certain movies, and then those ones became influential to the next generation. But a movie like Akira is just like its namesake, Akira Kurosawa, one of the greatest directors ever to live, and he made 30 movies, and most of them were absolutely breathtaking and far ahead of their time. And so whenever I hear Akira, I can't. It's funny, I can't separate the two. Obviously, a Japanese name, but I can't separate it from. For me, Akira is quality. Akira is almost like a stamp of approval, and I think that's pretty cool. And especially if you think way back to the first time you watched it, with you with your buddy shoving the rental copy in your hand, me with my friend Paul coming over to visit on a Saturday night, and we're literally in my basement, just watching it, and he had already seen it. So again, like
Yeah.
you, like I had someone that had seen it, and he was just like, "Yo, you need to watch this. There's never been anything like it." And so 30 years later, I still don't believe there's been anything like it. This is I'm going on, and I'm just gonna pop this one for. I'm gonna pop this one up here as we close out the video, and because this is similar. In my humble opinion, Akira is the animation equivalent to 2001: A Space Odyssey in terms of its craftsmanship and its importance in the art, and how it contributed by its essence of being and how it inspired other people to create. I cannot get around that. Like that's not something I've been saving. I saw this in the corner of my eye. It made me think of the monolith from 2001, and it just really brought into focus what has had a great impact on like that art medium and where it went from there.
Yeah, I consider it, like, quite frankly, and cut to the chase, I consider it still to this day to be the greatest animated movie of all time.
Without doubt.
And I know when people come up with their list of top favorite movies of all time, sometimes they come up with a separate list for animated movies. For me, no, this is right in the top 10.
Yes,
it's right there with like Alien, Blade Runner, and so on. It's right there.
And Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
And Babe.
There you go.
I love Babe. Babe's a great movie. Try arguing me on that one. It's a great movie. No, seriously. It's like Mike and I, neither of us have seen this movie in a number of years at this point. But listening to the music today and having these really extended conversations on it just show the impact that it had on our lives. There was no rehearsal for this. We literally sat down, we listened to the music, and as we're listening, we're chatting about various things. Something's about Akira, something's not. We looked at the various artwork that was in the gatefold, the LP sleeves. And it just brought back such memory, and to be able to look back at it now as as adults and seeing things in life, I find that I appreciate the art that is Akira even more than I did initially. What can you say about this? Like,
I think the only thing we can say is like literally, it sounds, it's not trying to be condescending, but if you haven't seen it, watch it, and also watch it properly. What I mean by that is, I don't care what format you watch it on, whether it be DVD or Blu-ray or Laserdisc, or
even if you're watching it on a tablet.
Yeah, or you may even want to watch it all the different dubs to get it, but watch it where you're not going to be distracted. It's one of those movies, like, don't put your phone on mute. If you're a parent, have it on night where the kids are in bed or something like that, where you're not going to be distracted by anything, and it's a long film too. It's about 2 hours or so. So for 2 hours, make sure there's no distractions, no phone calls, no nothing, and just sit there and be enveloped in this crazy cyberpunk post-apocalyptic world. And to get in with that, just one final thought. I know I'm rambling on here, but one final thought about how, which I forgot to mention earlier, how good Japan seems to be at envisioning a post-apocalyptic world, because they pretty much do live in one, if you want to look at it in that crazy kind of way. So it's charged that way, where they're, they actually went through something like this. So now they've got reference, and it's maybe a bit more hard-hitting because of that.
I find what you're talking about has had a substantial influence in Japanese cinema. Even Godzilla, the original Godzilla, when you think of that movie, when you think of Godzilla, you think about dude in a rubber suit, Mothra, just big monster fights, rah rah rah, and the horrible American remix. When you sit down and watch the original Godzilla, and especially if you could, well, it's actually both versions of it. The version that they had Ray Bradbury in it, as well as the non-Ray Bradbury edition. Both of them are phenomenal. Both of them are treated very seriously. Even Shin Godzilla, which was directed by Anno, who was the creator of Evangelion. That movie depicted the bureaucracy behind, if something like that happened, how would governments handle it? The organization of different entities in terms of trying to figure it out and to bring solution and resolution to it. And I found that far more interesting than Big Rubber Suit Monster. Yeah. And the first movie did have that a lot, because of course it was in reference to the nuclear explosions at the end of the Second World War. And you know the fear that that had on the zeitgeist at the time of the Japanese populace. So seeing something like this, and you know, it's like, well, we've had this horrendous thing that like really like no one should ever have to go through that bullshit. Sorry for the swears, but it's serious, right? So, but surviving that as a people and moving on and rebuilding, which was so admirable, and which is one of the great things about Japanese people.
Yeah.
But being able to not forget the past, and even if it's in something like a movie where essentially a dude in a giant rubber lizard costume, they did it in a way that gave a gravity of seriousness and contemplation, and really evoked thoughts. And even like, you know, reflection, like world events and self-reflection, and getting that from a movie like Godzilla is crazy. But again, you know, we are seeing a pattern, you know, over the span of 70 years or so, where, you know, like Japan makes great movies that are not Hollywood movies. They've done so for so long, and Akira is just another example, like the best example of animation.
Yeah.
But it's you know, the hits keep coming from Japan. It doesn't surprise me at all that most of the video games that we enjoyed, especially growing up, of course, the majority of them came from Japan, but our affinity to it as well. So, you know, okay, props to the Japanese. Like, seriously, they're strong people, and you know, they really create some beautiful art, and Akira is a shining example of that. And this is a movie that I know that I'm going to watch. I haven't seen it in several years, but as we were saying on our other video on video game soundtrack review, collectively we've probably seen the movie 80 times, and that's more or less split down the middle. So, you know, I haven't seen this movie in 6 years. I think in the next week or so, I'm probably going to watch it just from having these conversations. Like we've spent well over an hour collectively just talking to you, the viewer, about our experiences. You know, listening to the soundtrack on the other video, and then this one, talking about how we feel about the movie. So, Mike, closing words, my brother.
Closing words is, I'll reiterate again, I believe it is the greatest animated film of all time, and it stands right up there, shoulder to shoulder, with the greatest live-action movies of all time. And quite frankly, if you haven't seen it, just see it any way you can. And
but in that any way you can, the caveat is undivided attention.
Undivided attention, exactly. And yeah, and again, if you watched it the first time and you may be a bit confused, or maybe you watched a different dub, watch a different dubber, and it's going to require multiple viewings. There's a lot to absorb, so just be ready for that. It's not like some 80-minute comedy which you can get off at once. This is not like that at all.
No, my personal recommendations for formats to watch it. If you're good with watching movies and shows with subtitles, I honestly would bypass the dubs and go straight to that, because you're going to get an accurate representation of the story and the deeper themes. If it annoys you constantly looking down, and especially for a first time watching this movie, if you're not a super quick reader, you want to keep your eyes focused on the screen, because there's so much happening, there's so much art that is in front of you, you know, that you'll miss if you blink your eye. Then obviously, of course, watch a dub. I've only watched the Pioneer dub once, and I can't comment on it because I have no opinion of it.
Yeah.
The streamlined dub with Leonardo from Ninja Turtles playing Kaneda, and with some of the goofiest lines you'll ever hear in a movie, I would still recommend that. It gives you the gist of what's happening, and then once you see everything pretty and you kind of get the gist of what's going on in the story, you can revisit the original language audio version with subtitles, and then you can start digging into the philosophical aspects of it, and then that's where you'll start to reflect on it, and that's where this movie really shines, is the deeper understanding. Basically, it's not preachy, and I believe it's a very personal journey that you take when you're watching it, and it's up to you in terms of what you think about the message that the messages they're talking about and wrestling with in the movie. But this is definitely something that is worth your time. It will never talk down to you, and it is as far as I'm concerned, it is ageless. It is an ageless piece of art.
Yep.
And I think that's the highest. I think it's the highest form of recommendation that I could give something. Where it is a movie. It is there for your consumption and enjoyment. But make no mistake, this is a piece of art. And again, for those that have seen this movie, chances are you agree with us. If not, pro or con, comments below.
Yep.
But considering the reputation and history this movie has, most people do think highly of it. So I'll definitely give it a watch. Well, Mike, this has been a phenomenal evening. Usually we'll listen to 4 albums in one night. or one day to today. This was only Akira because we knew there was a lot to unpack, and clearly we have more to say about this movie than we would than say Outrun, even though Outrun's a phenomenal, phenomenal soundtrack and a phenomenal game. This has had more significant impact on society and the arts, so definitely worthwhile speaking about it at length.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, dear Chargeback Army. You know, we really appreciate you watching these videos. We appreciate the comments. Just keep it coming. Follow us on Twitter. We both do that thing. Prepare for number. Big Mike and Terence Inbound. Occasionally you put stuff on there. Occasionally. So Chargeback Army, until the next time we have an opportunity to sit down and chat and share that with you, it's been an absolute pleasure, and we look forward to speaking with you again. And you, Big Mike.
Oh, thank you. You should be, because I'm freaking awesome.
It's freaking awesome. Very soon. Thanks for watching, and we really look forward to doing this again very soon.